Admiral Kelly, Captain Card, officers and sailors of the USS Abraham Lincoln, my fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Well, it was the victory speech before the battle was actually won. On May 1st, 2003, exactly 10 years ago today, a triumphant President Bush landed on the USS Lincoln and declared victory over Saddam Hussein and his allies. The speech happened just 2 months after American troops stormed into the country. A massive mission accomplished banner actually hung in the back. But on the anniversary of this infamous speech, let's take a look back at what the U.S. actually accomplished in Iraq and where the country stands today. Now, by the time President Bush made this speech,
in this battle, we have fought for the cause of liberty and for the peace of the world. Our nation and our coalition are proud of this accomplishment.
The U.S. had conducted a massive bombing campaign and engaged in skirmishes with Iraqi troops. The stated goals for entering this war were to topple Saddam Hussein and free the Iraqi people. Well, with Saddam Hussein on the run and Baghdad overrun by coalition forces, President Bush moved on to his next goal: find and obtain weapons of mass destruction.
We have difficult work to do in Iraq. We're bringing order to parts of that country that remain dangerous. We're pursuing and finding leaders of the old regime who will be held to account for their crimes. We've begun the search for hidden chemical and biological weapons and already know of hundreds of sites that will be investigated.
The only problem is that there weren't any. 8 months after President Bush made that speech, U.S. weapons inspectors actually reported that WMDs didn't exist. So in a sense, mission accomplished. Well, but even since those infamous speech and later admissions of the lack of WMDs, the U.S. stayed in Iraq, sacrificing money and resources and also human lives on a mission that was already declared a victory. Now, let's look at the money of this. In September 2002, White House advisors estimated that the conflict would cost somewhere between $100 and $200 billion. But by 2006, the U.S. had tallied over $1 trillion in expenses and counting. In 2007, President Bush again approached Congress to ask for an additional $46 billion for overseas military operations. Today, here's a look at the total amount of money spent in Iraq. I should mention that these numbers are on the conservative end. This is because it does not account for the hundreds of billions of dollars the U.S. will spend on future veteran care and also interest on our debt. Also important to note, according to the Iraq Rebuilding Inspector General, of the $60.5 billion effort to rebuild the country, at least $9 billion was wasted or subject to fraud. That's 14% of the total. Now, let's talk about lives lost. More important than the money is the human toll of this war. Since that day on the USS Lincoln, 3,424 American troops died in combat. Numbers for Iraqis are harder to come by, but estimates say anywhere from 112 to 122,000 civilians actually died. And as for the promise to liberate the Iraqi people,
when Iraqi civilians looked into the faces of our servicemen and women, they saw strength and kindness and goodwill.
Less than a year later, images like these actually came out and shocked the world. The abuses of detainees at Abu Ghraib put an ugly face on the war. Even before these pictures came out, Amnesty International accused the U.S. of using cruel, inhumane, and degrading conditions on captured enemy combatants. As for the civilian population, an estimated 1.6 to 2 million people fled the country, and many more were displaced internally. That is a trend that continues even today. Just over 20% of the 58,000 refugees admitted to the U.S. in 2012 were from Iraq. And what about the idea of creating a country that is actually of, by, and for the Iraqi people? Well, this week, 10 news stations had their licenses revoked from the country. It is the worst silencing of the press since the days of Saddam Hussein. And when it comes to freedom to walk the streets safely, 15 people were killed today in multiple blasts, an occurrence that still happens on a near daily basis in that country. So today, 10 years to the day after this infamous speech was made, it's important to put this, as well as the entire war, into context as the U.S. shifts its focus away from the country. So is it mission accomplished? Well, you be the judge. In Washington, Megan Lopez, RT.